Hi, everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour number 167. While Dan was changing the color of his face. Sorry, Dan.
Oh, that's all right.
So, I'll tell you what. I'm just going to I'm going to say hi to you guys. And then while the show commences, I'm going to try to fix my microphone. Is that all right?
Sure.
I'm talking into this very fancy, nice microphone, but you're actually hearing me through a webcam. So it probably sounds like crap. So anyway, Mike, how you doing, man?
Doing good. Doing good. Pretty busy. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Dan, how are you?
Crazy busy. Like it's just madness right now. But it's it's games, man. Software development.
Ain't nothing wrong with that, huh?
It's kind of what we're in for, right?
Sorry, guys, you're going to hear an echo until I get this microphone fixed. I was going to talk about a couple things, but Mike, you were going to talk about some Logic stuff. Do you mind if I mute myself and you handle what you were going to show with Logic, and then I'll try to fix my mic?
Sure, no problem. And by show, I hope you mean describe through the magic of my voice.
Yes, it's a visual show through the soothing tones of your voice.
I'm going to try to weave an image. Wow, that's a pretty bad echo. Well,
okay, I'm out.
We're going to pretend it's an album from the 70s with digital delay. Oh, I think it's fixed. Cool. So hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about Logic's new articulation management system. So generally speaking, Logic 10.4 was released a little over a month ago, maybe a month and a week. It was received with great enthusiasm, and it had a bunch of new features, a lot of new plugins, and many welcome bug fixes. And one addition was this new articulation system, which I think is one of the most significant additions to Logic since Apple took control of the product. So I wanted to highlight why it's cool and why you should use it if you're a logician. So generally speaking, for the benefit of beginners, when we talk about articulations in the context of sample libraries, we mean different ways of playing an instrument. So a violin could be played legato or pizzicato or tremolo, and a guitar can be plucked, or you can play it with harmonics. So we're using the term in a little more general of a way than an instrumentalist would use it. Just means anything you can do with an instrument that makes noise. And generally speaking, we want three things from an articulation management system. One is that we want to be able to specify during real-time input the articulations on the fly, usually by a key switch or something similar, so that when you're playing, you don't have to stop everything and switch articulations and start again. You can just shift as you go. Number two, we want to look at our already recorded data, our already recorded music, and see which articulation corresponds to which note. So we kind of see a passage and we know that it's staccato or drum roll flam or whatever it is. And if we're really lucky, it would be really cool to be able to see that when we're in notation view. And the third thing is that obviously on playback, we want the articulations to trigger some kind of sound change in the destination plugin, especially with third-party plugins that don't necessarily know what's going on inside of Logic. So what's the state of the art so far? In the past, we've had key switches, usually, which are ways of shifting articulations. And the problem here is twofold. One is that key switches are not really standard among different libraries. And although some libraries let you configure which keys trigger which articulations, not all of them do. East-West, I think, does not let you. It's kind of impoverished where key switches are concerned. I think they give you one patch and you're stuck with whatever mappings are there. I could be wrong. The other problem, which is a little more pernicious, is that when you record key switches, you now have key switches in your MIDI data. And these are notes that are usually outside the playable range of the instruments. You've got stuff like way low or way high, and it's ugly, it's hard to edit. If you're trying to look at a melody line and figure out where the articulation changes happen, you have to kind of scan up and down and say, okay, that looks like a C, 3 octaves below middle C, and I see I'm matching it to that note there, and it's a pain. And if you ever try to transpose a MIDI sequence with a key switch in it, you've probably just ruined your key switches because they needed to be on specific notes. So we can do better. Articulation system in Logic has two basic components. One is that the idea of embedding articulation information into each note. So it just has, each note has a velocity or MIDI channel burnt into it. Now it also has an articulation ID. And this is actually something that's been in logic for a long time, but we couldn't really do anything interesting with it. There's been support for the articulation IDs, but that was about it. So with 10.4, several cool new features have been added. One is that you can input articulations with a number of different controls. So you can set up key switch controls in logic, and they will specify the articulation of each incoming note. And since articulations are actually built into the note, we then discard the key switch data. So if you say C1 is going to mean staccato and you're playing it in real time, you hit C1, you play some notes, and then you stop. Those notes now all have staccato articulation ID burnt into them permanently. I mean, until you edit, but it's there. And that C1 is not recorded. That's just discarded. So you don't get that extra data at the bottom of your MIDI sequence, which is really nice. And you don't have to use key switches. You can use controller data or pedals or whatever you'd like, but it's a very flexible system. So now that you have your articulation ID built into the notes, you can actually open up the editors and see what's going on very easily. You can look at your notes in list view, and it'll show you on a note-by-note basis what articulation is being used. But more coolly, you can have logic change the note colors so that they correspond to articulations. So all your staccatos will be yellow and all your legatos will be green, et cetera. And it's a really neat way just to kind of look at your data and know what's going on. And if you want to edit an articulation in something you've already recorded, you just click on a note and you drag a menu up, or you do any number of things that'll change the articulation. It's really handy. So editing is really easy, and you no longer have to deal with those ungainly key switch notes that are all the way in the stratosphere of your MIDI. And finally, it lets you specify what happens when logic plays a note with a particular articulation. And this, again, is a menu of options. It's a very flexible set of possibilities. So you can say, whenever you play a staccato note, I want you to send key switch C-2 to whatever plugin happens to be listening. Or you can say, I want you to send MIDI controller 32 with a value of 20 to whoever's listening. So whatever specific system your plugin uses to change articulations, you can lock that all in a black box, program logic once to know how to communicate with that plugin, and then just completely forget about it. All that stuff is backend. And you can set your own control scheme in logic, which you can edit very easily. So the net effect is that articulation control migrates from the plugins to the DAW, which is where you want it. So it's really handy. And I think this is a big game changer for Logic. I know that Logic is catching up to Cubase in this regard, and Cubase has something very similar in its expression map system. And Logic's been behind, but the new system seems to be cut from the same cloth. I'm not super familiar with Cubase, but I think this is kind of the same idea. So very handy. It can save you a lot of time. It can finally give you a way to edit articulations in your pre-existing MIDI data. You can just look at the data, change the articulations very easily. And it's extremely practical. I've started reconfiguring most of my go-to orchestral instruments to use this. That's pretty much a synopsis. It's definitely worth playing around with. I will add as a postscript that prior to this system, there have been a couple of third-party systems by some very ingenious developers. Ski Switcher was one, and I know that Babylon Waves made another system where you would draw automation data, and you would actually see the articulations in a separate lane, and you could move the articulation. You could change the articulations by moving this automation, which was node-based rather than continuous. And all these systems had their advantages, and some of them were a little more flexible than what Logic offers. But the fact that the system is now built into Logic means it's the new de facto standard. So unless you need some of the very advanced techniques that the third-party alternatives offer, I would suggest acquainting yourself with the new system. I've run out of things to say. Dan or Kyle, if you've got any questions, or anyone in the chat room has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, that sounds really, it does sound very similar to Cubase's expression mapping, but it actually sounds like it's maybe one up on it. It's been a while since I used expression mapping. I'm not fond of key switching or articulation switching, to be honest with you, personally. And there's a couple reasons for that. But the way that the expression mapping works in the Cubase version that I have, basically you set up your map of like, hey, this articulation maps to this thing, right? Whether it be a key switch or the CC value or something like that, and then you get a essentially an extra lane underneath your note, and you can assign the articulation there, and it's okay. I don't remember it moving with the notes, to be honest with you. It's more like an additional type of automation data.
Do you have to manually move the articulation changes every time you move a note, or else move the whole region?
I don't remember if they select along with it, like if you wanted to move a note. I don't remember. It seemed more like a turn this on now and then we'll turn this on later. So it wasn't like you're not going to have like two notes on top of each other with like two different articulations. Unless you do some fancy timing thing, right. Where you're like
one tick off.
Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't like, so personally, I find myself spending a lot of time on like setting up key switch systems, end up getting thrown out all that time because I end up doing things like I need these particular stacks stacked with these legatos, or like I'll go through like a legato phrase and then I'll be like, I'm going to add a stack layer here and a stack layer here and a mark layer here or something like that, to kind of like accent the byte on the attack of those particular notes. And, once you've set up some sort of key switching system, obviously like you're swapping out like the articulation changes, right? Because then you're leaving the layering up to the developer, the way that they've built their their instrument and how it responds to, I don't know, velocity or whatever, right?
You can mix and match too. I mean, you can.
Yeah, of course. So that tends, I tend to be like, oh, they did a key switch thing, and I'm gonna just that aside. But and it could also be, this could be another thing, is that I am not a big player. Like my keyboarding skills are wanting in a lot of ways. And so I feel like key switching got its start with like a performance system. Like, hey, I got my keyboard out and I'm like, I can like in a single performance start swapping between all these patches, right? So I feel like that's where it got its sort of roots. But I love the idea of key switching, and key switching systems or expression mapping in the way that it's like, hey, I've got, here's my actual notation data, and I can say I want a staccato here and a staccato here and a marcato here, and that makes a lot of sense.
But that's what's nice about Logic System is essentially you're able to do that. Like you don't ever have to use a key switch. You can click on notes and assign them articulations and do it entirely editorially. So if you don't want to ever bother with real-time input, that's there for you. And the ability to assign colors to different articulations is surprisingly useful, even though you have to memorize, green is legato, because you're looking at the articulations at the same time as looking at your notation data. And if you're coming from the notation world where you're used to just looking at a note and immediately knowing where it is, that feels very natural.
Yeah, it sounds really cool, man. It sounds really cool. It's Mac only though, so.
It is, unfortunately. Sorry, 90% of computer owners. You paid the price for your lack of vision.
Hey, guess what? I'm going to be able to benefit from this now with fancy lights because I ordered one of those complete controllers.
Is that a Native Instruments thing with a phonetic K?
With all the cool lights, man.
Or it's a German K, right? Like just German, right?
I think they
What'd
are
you say?
a company.
Isn't Native Instruments a German company?
Yes, they are. I can barely hear you guys. Sorry about that. But that's my setup, not your microphones.
All right.
Hey, I want to we're gonna have to end I might have to jump out of here at 6:45 really quickly to say goodbye to my wife who's leaving for a convention. Her flight got canceled or got delayed, so she's leaving later. So she's actually over there somewhere, and I had no idea. But I thought maybe I would run out and say hi while Dan was talking about a review of some stuff, because we were, the people at Pro Sound Effects were nice enough to send us a couple of libraries to check out. Submerged in New York City, Ambisonics, and I was going to do a review of it in New York City, and Dan was going to do a review of Submerged. I just wanted to say thank you very much for lending us the libraries and letting us check them out. We really appreciate it. And but before we get started with that, I thought it'd be important to say hi to Isotope, who I was talking about last week, and all the amazing things that they can do for you. I was just about to reference my points from a week or two ago, and I thought, nah, I better not. Hey, thanks Isotope for sponsoring the show and taking care of us all the time. I won't say the things I said last week about how awesome you are and the things that I've been doing. But if you want to find out, go watch the show, what I was talking about. There you go. There's some plugging. And also, yeah, I think that's it. Just thanks, Isotope, for handling things. During my review, I'm going to pop up RX4, because on this old machine, that's what's on here, and show some waveform data from the Ambisonics. But Dan, did you want to dig in on Submerged, and then I'll mute my mic and pop out really quickly?
Sure, man. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Let her rip.
All right. So yeah, a couple things. First, worth mentioning, when I was freelancing, between the time that I left the school, or actually near the end of the time I was at the school, and before I started an Epic, I had the Pro Sound Effects freelancer program, and that is very nice. Like, if you're a freelancer, I recommend that. They ain't paying me. I just recommend it. Like, if you were one of my students, I'd be like, you should totally look into this. And the reason is because I actually really dislike generic libraries. I always find, like, if you're lucky, there's some good material. Like it's like rolling the die. And usually when you're working on a project, there's oftentimes some sort of specific niche thing that you need as like sound sources, and your generic library is going to have like 2 of them, and you already used the first one on the last project, right? So you're like, oh man, I guess I'm gonna have to mangle this and then reuse this, and it's frustrating. And so the cool thing about something like their freelancer program is that the way that it worked when I was on it was like, you just had a subscription, and they would, like, whatever your subscription level was, they would just give you credits for a quantity of sounds. And then they have this huge online library of just like a lot of participating sound libraries. So you get some like access to some of those generic libraries, but you also get access to like really cool libraries like the BBC Nature library, which is awesome. It has amazing ambiances. So then when you get in your project and you're like, oh, suddenly I need like a ton of birds sounds, and like you have some recordings of birds that you've, the local robins and stuff, but you don't have like the fancy exotic stuff you need for this match 3 game. Then, then you can start, like, you got this between projects, you've been accumulating all these credits, and so then you just drop like 15, you get some sounds that are specific to the project you're working on, and then you move on, you kind of like go from there. So I think that's just an extra bonus thing. So Pro Sound Effects, whatever I say today, I dig you. So with that said, I'll pull up some of my notes on the Submerged library. I did try. I know that Kyle's going to talk about the New York Ambisonics. I was looking forward to trying the New York Ambisonics thing out, but I didn't get the download working. For some reason, my download thing didn't go through. And so I did try out their little demo, the freebie one, which is cool, by the way. If anyone's shopping around, then you can download they've got like demo versions. But there was one thing that I noticed that I'll have to talk to Kyle about. Maybe it might be clearer on the official full version. But yeah, so I looked at Submerged. Submerged is a hydrophonic library. So that personally, I think that's like one of those niche things. Like if you're going to record some like underwater sounds, you can risk a microphone with prophylactic, or you chip in for a hydrophone, right? Like those are kind of your options.
Do people actually do that? The first technique?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, sure, why not, right? Like if you've got a microphone and you don't mind that you lose it in a session, then yeah, you can go for that. Non-lubricated, by the way, just but you're just like just like anything involving prophylactics, there is a little bit of risk involved, right? So
well done.
you have to sort of mitigate that or navigate that anyway. So they've got a whole library of hydrophonic assets, and I think like overall I'm gonna say it's totally, like, if you're working on an underwater game, then this is a fantastic resource. I think that, I mean, like I would like a hydrophone, and I've thought about getting one many times, but the thing is that there are a variety of hydrophones just like any other microphone, and a lot of the lower tier, more affordable hydrophones are really just like glorified contact microphones with like extra coating on them, which makes them even more dampened. Like, so you kind of have to sort out what is it worth. So yeah, they've got a full library of hydrophonic recordings, lots of variety. So my pluses on this was like, hey, lots of variety in sounds. I thought there was a lot of potential in the sound sources for sound design opportunities. I think actually you could use some of them very interestingly in granular processes. There were some unexpected sources. So I didn't check out the library before I downloaded it, like on their promo or whatever, like their bullet points. But one of the unexpected sources was they had a good selection of male and female vocalizations. So like screaming underwater and stuff like that, which I imagine if you're working on like an underwater game, there's probably some danger of drowning. So,
that's rad.
You're covered. Yeah, but it was just kind of cool because I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, why not? Like underwater yeah, sure. If nothing else, as a reference. So like obviously, with all vocalizations in a library, there's sort of a generic like thread of content, right? Like it's like exertions or screaming or whatever, right? I think if nothing else, you can use them as a reference for, say, some dialogue production. Like, so if you actually have dialogue and you want sort of like a realistic quality to the underwater dialogue, then you could just start matching it, being against like actual recorded underwater vocalization. So that's kind of a cool use, if for no other reason. I thought the scuba diver breaths were like a really awesome, like one of the highlight. They sounded really good. I thought they were super usable. I thought that they had some fireworks and rocket propulsion sounds, which were really cool. The impacts were like, as in the case of all explosions, a little disappointing. Like realistic explosions are, of course, much less than we imagine that they would be,
yeah.
Particularly underwater. But the that sound was really cool. I really liked their. They had like a air cannon blast sound that was they had a bunch of variety of those. They had some cool bubbles that were very musical, and I actually thought you could sit down and create like a really interesting ambient instrument out of them if you wanted to, because they had slightly marimba quality to them. And other highlights are that some of the sound sources have actually a lot of bandwidth, which is great because a lot of hydrophone recordings are very narrow in like the sort of spectrum that you get out of the recording. So those are my pluses. Those are my pluses. I have some negatives.
That's a good list of pluses.
That's a good. I like I said. I think this is, if you're working on an underwater game, I think this is a library to get. Like, it's just one of those, especially for what is it, like $80? Like,
yeah,
I think, yeah, I think you've got, and there's just not a lot out there to begin with, right? Like,
did you watch the video of the guy who was doing the recordings?
Yeah, I think that's a great video. I actually really like it as an instructional video. If I were still teaching, I would definitely show my students that video. So a couple of the cons, the editing is really mixed. Like the editing, the approach to editing is really, really sort of all over the place. There are some sounds where you're like, hey, individual sounds that are nicely edited, cut, or there's just like, sometimes you're like, why'd you cut that sound off? I don't know. Or like suddenly you'll have maybe like there could be like, say, 10 assets that are of the same enumerated category, and then it'll be like one shot, and then a 4-minute file, and then one shot, and you're just like, wait, what? Like, why? So it was really confusing. Organizationally, it's kind of like sometimes it'll be like stereo, mono, and then a completely different like noisy recording. Like the organization's a little confusing with that respect. Like I said, some sounds are tightly edited and cut and ready to place. I think this is a big thing as game audio peeps. It's important to sort of evaluate the potential of a library for just like direct use. Like,
yeah,
is it ready to go? And I would say only like there's some of the assets are just drag and drop ready to go. None of the long files were looped.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably looping them would be easy. Like, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But that, like I said, looping it's easy, right? So I think that's that's like a demographic thing. I appreciate that it's a demographic thing. Like, when you're targeting, you're releasing a library, like, who's your target? If your target is game designers, obviously you want that stuff ready to drop. But so we're sort of straddling that. Yeah. So, and then there were some, like, you get some mixed noise in there. Like some assets were like noisy and unclear if it was just like that particular part of the recording was done. So that was kind of a mixed bag. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty solid library, and definitely would recommend it to anyone who's like, I've got nothing, I'm working on this underwater game. Like, there you go.
Yeah.
You can always use
I thought it was. Oh, sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
I was just being a smartass. I was going to say, you can use a phaser plugin and just roll off everything over 5K.
But it's so much more than that, Mike.
6K.
I thought it was pretty smart, Alice. I thought it was a good library too. I agree. Well, I had the pleasure of looking at New York City, NYC Ambisonics. I want to mention before I dig in that their pricing structure is really cool. Like, if you're a freelancer, you can get up to 60% off of their sound libraries. And I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that's single downloads. I'd certainly know it's the major libraries. Excuse me, but look into that. it's really cool that a company offers a special price for freelancers, because we do. There are a lot of us, and some of these things, especially sound effects libraries, are really expensive. So this is a great deal. They're really cool. Well, they kind of had me at Mangenius. Mark Mangini does a lot of stuff, a lot of amazing sound effects, and they seem to be tied somehow professionally with him, which is really fantastic. As a matter of fact, I just picked up a library called I'd have to log in. It's like Explosion or something. It was super inexpensive. It's a bunch of explosions, and if I'm reading it correctly, it was culled from Mark Mangini's own sound effects, which is really amazing. So they've got some great stuff at Pro Sound Effects, and they're tying themselves to some fantastic people like Game Audio Hour. And so I checked out New York City Ambisonics, and I'm going to start right with a comment that Dan made, where he said that some of the underwater sounds sounded marimba-like, and you could almost use them for an instrument. So I brought up, I want to share my screen here of RX. See if I can do that without crashing again. Let's see here. Sharing. I hit the share screen button. Let me see it. RX. Start a share screen. Let me see. Are you guys seeing that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that waveform looks like Astoria.
Yep, we lost him.
It's a bit of an anticlimax.
Yeah.
Because dead silence is something Astoria Queens is not. Well, while we wait for because Kyle said that RX was somehow interfering with his audio. I bet that's what happened. I bet
Interesting.
Old version. Well, let me ask you a question about the underwater library until Kyle comes back.
Yeah.
Do these sounds feel like they were all recorded? This is a bit of a metaphor question, but do they feel like they were recorded in the same space, or whatever the consideration is, underwater?
No, it sounds like so. No, the small answer is no, and I forgive that. I wouldn't necessarily want it to be, but I think it's a matter of there's like field recording. I think this kind of library is a product of opportunity, something that over time you find the opportunity to record unusual places or things happening. Some of the assets were like, here's the ambience of under the water near a large waterfall. Here's the ambience underwater of like a hot tub. So these are completely different environments, and obviously those you want them to be different, right? Things like there were some very nice bubble gestures that were very clean, and obviously they recorded those in a very controlled situation. The fireworks sounded like they were in a little slightly more caustic environment, as a contrast. So I think that you can't necessarily expect like that kind of consistency. I think the hope is that you get like noise floor consistency and stuff like that. That's what the hope is.
So I crashed again, huh?
You did, yeah.
How far in did I get?
You got to like, here is the waveform.
You kidding me? I talked for like 5 minutes not knowing I'd crash. I'm going to kill Google. I swear to God, I hate the Googs.
So didn't you notice that we were talking, and I guess not?
No, I thought maybe I would just had everybody so entranced, It's unbelievable, man. I've crashed like 3 times this show already. So I'm not going to show a screen share. So I'll tell you what I was going to show you is that I opened up. So let me just start differently now. I'm all flustered. So the sound effect, the New York City Ambisonic Library is fantastic. Of course, It is what you expect it to be. It's sound. It's the background sound of New York. But they went all over the place, from Battery Park to Astoria, Queens. They went all to Mike Shapiro's old house. They went all over the place to get great sounds, and it just runs great. I mean, it's just Ambisonics. So I set up my surround sound. I could hear everything clearly. They use a software which I had not known about beforehand, that is fantastic, called, and I'm not going to show you a screen share, although I set it up to do that. It's called Soundfield Sound Zone 2. One thing about the library is they give you stereo files, which I'm very appreciative of, but the surround files are all B format surround, which means that it's W, X, Y, and Z rather than left, right, center, left surround, and right surround, and LFE. But the software Soundfield Surround Zone will convert that for you. It'll also fold down to stereo if you want it, but I was appreciative of them just supplying the stereo files. I've never used Format B. As a matter of fact, I'd never heard of it until I saw this this software. So I think that's either me admitting my ignorance and it's everywhere, and I don't know, somehow it just escaped my knowledge. But so I was expecting to see regular left, right, but so that kind of threw me for a minute. But it's no big deal because this software will convert it for you to what you're used to seeing. Also,
if you want, I can talk about the format.
Oh yeah. Let's revisit that here in a minute.
Yeah.
So, but the software was great. I loaded it up in Pro Tools. I gave it a shot in Ableton, but of course Ableton can't accept surround files, so it wasn't going to show all these multi-channel files, and nothing worked there. So here's what I was getting at with when I exploded on the internet, is that I took a number of their libraries, one in particular, excuse me, which was the first one, which was Astoria, Queens. There was so much musical information in there because you can hear trains and you hear car brakes, that, like Dan was saying, the underwater sound of marimba. I thought, I want to take this and put it into Isotope Iris, which is their synthesizer that's based off of the spectrograph, and just select that like musical sections. There was this one part, I hate saying this because as I'm saying this, my brain's going, you just said this, don't say this again. You're repeating yourself. But I wasn't here when I said this before. They had this one note of this like train braking that was so menacing. It was wonderful. And I just want to create a synthesizer just of that note and, repatch it all over the place. It was fantastic.
Can we hear that?
You kidding me? I'll blow up.
Well, I don't mean do anything sophisticated. I mean, just literally play it through something and let it come through the mic just so we can.
Oh my God, Mike, I'm going to try
Windows 95, man.
It's not Windows 95.
Because I mean, hearing someone talk about sound design is a little bit of, it's the dancing about architecture.
Yeah.
Experience.
Okay.
And you seem to really
find it. At this point, I'm going to if I crash again, I'll just go to bed. You guys can finish the show.
In real life, if you want to hear a terrifying train brake squeal, just take any Long Island Railroad train into Queens, because so much deferred maintenance that they all sound that way. So I'm ready for some nostalgia.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if so I can hear that, but I don't think you guys can. I don't know if you can hear it. Did you hear that?
No.
All right. Well, anyway, if somebody's brave enough, get the library. The file's called New York City Astoria Queens 01 stereo file, because I'm using RX4, and it's at just after 2 minutes. There's this crazy skidding brake sound that just sounds so cool. Anyway, I tried it again. I mean, I don't know what the license will allow you to create a synth of the sound effect. I don't know what the extent of that license is, but it's worth checking out. Now the price is fantastic. So they let us have a license to do a review of the show, and I found out I had already bought this and I had already used this library, which was really crazy because in my sound effects librarian software, there's thousands upon thousands of samples, and you go through looking for stuff. And so I was like, oh crap. When I went to register it, it goes, you've already got a copy. I said, oh, that's interesting. And so then I started looking, because I save anything. I don't know if this is helpful, but any sound that I use in a game, I create in my librarian software, I use brackets and I use that game title, and I'll put copies, or I don't copy them in there, but I put targets to the original in that folder, so I know exactly what sound effects I used for that game in case I have to explain it later. And so I started looking through the games, and I was like, oh, look at this. I've already used this a couple times. So that was really cool. It says something about the library. Software, sound fields, surround zone, fantastic. The sounds recorded super well, very well done. It's all over New York City. I found it ironic that some of the parks were quieter than the graveyard that they included. Just great recordings all the way around. The software will also pan up and down, which is a very good feature. So I assume, although I didn't hear a lot of difference in the library when I was playing through the panning, top to bottom, I didn't hear much change. I assume they've accounted for that in the recording process that they used. One thing I wish I would have looked into before this review started, and it didn't even dawn on me, was to learn what microphone setup they use to record with. Because right now they're doing a giveaway, a surround sound giveaway of the Sennheiser Ambio mic, which is really fantastic. I don't know if they use that for this library, because I don't think the mic was out when they recorded this library, but whatever they used, well done. That
was my nickname in college, by the way, Ambio mic.
Ambio mic. I will say that I do have a couple of critiques. One of them was, and Dan's going to speak to this, that I was expecting to see a left, right, center, surround, LFE kind of format. And so I imagine, as long as I've been doing this, I was surprised to see that. And I imagine that other people who aren't familiar like me wouldn't know quite what to do. And it kind of forces me into the software that they use. Pro Tools tried to default to a bunch of quadraphonic stuff because of the WXYZ format of Surround B. And so I had to use the software to get away from that. The other thing is that it was, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, is that a lot of the sounds are redundant. You know, New York, as interesting as it is, can sound very similar depending upon where you were. And so if you were in Battery Park or you were in Central Park, Mike, I assume those are two different places. I've never spent much time in New York City. Those sound so similar that I wondered, why would I use one over the other? Oh, pardon me, guys. I got to knock at the door.
All right. It's the pro sound effects. They're like, what'd you talk about New York like that for? Yeah. So let's talk about Ambisonics real quick. So Ambisonics, first order Ambisonics is comprised of 4 channels of audio. There is the most common types of Ambisonics first order are Ambisonics A format and Ambisonics B format. Now, it's important to keep this in mind. The Ambio mic and similar mics tend to record in Ambisonics A format, and the Ambisonics B format is what's useful for like surround encoding. So games, for example, like one of the new features in 4.19 of the Unreal Engine 4 is now we have some support for Ambisonics playback, right? And so we expect B format to come in. There are different standards of B format, and I can talk about B format in a way a traditional engineer will understand. So
yes.
So B format is basically like a really elaborate mid-side setup. Okay, so if you can think of like a mid-side, right? You have your figure 8 that's 90 degrees off axis, and then you have your cardioid, right? That's full on. Yeah. Okay, so the idea there, right, is then you sum the two together and then you subtract the two. And
we talked about this on another show.
You get a left and right, right? Okay, cool. So basically, the way that Ambisonics B format is set up is you have a so let's just first of all say mid-side in a way, you could say you have your mid information, your side information. Your side information is like a vector, left and right, because it represents the same direction. It's basically just this direction, right?
Yeah.
Sideways, basically, right? So with Ambisonics B format, you have the first channel, which is the W channel, and that is essentially an omnidirectional mic.
Okay.
Okay. And then you have 3 vector channels. That's left and right as one vector, right? Or one channel. Then you have forward and rear as one channel. And then you have up and down, or X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
Okay. So what's interesting, and so the encoding actually is very similar. The idea of encoding, right? So if you just took the W and the X, you could actually create a mid-side setup. So that's just something to keep in mind. So that helps you sort of understand. But what's cool about this is that you actually, from 4 channels of audio, get 6 directions of sound.
That makes sense.
So it's actually economical, right? And so from that, you get this sort of spherical representation of all the sound around you.
Yeah. So
now it's
say
only,
I want to. Oh,
it's only like 6 directions, so the resolution is kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
Right. But that's what first order means, is that second order is even more channels. And so first order, but what's cool is that you can very easily extrapolate a stereo mix down. You can extrapolate a 7-channel mix down. Like, it's very easy to sort of pull these directions out of it. And then what's cool is that you can also rotate. So you have orientation information.
Yeah. I could definitely hear a difference even in the stereo field when I switched from Ambisonic B, what they call it? They called it format B to format A being the more traditional. Format B introduced more bass for some reason. It was really odd. Like, there was more of a bass presence with B than there was with A.
That's interesting. So so A format is basically 4 figure-8 pickups. So the Ambisonics microphone, which here I can show you the Ambio.
Nice.
So,
by the way, Mike, you can tell we're in the same place. Our windows are the same color of blue.
All right. So here's the inside of the Ambio mic.
Beauty.
It's basically 4 figure-8.
Okay.
And they're set up in like a tetrahedral pattern, right? Like a.
Let me see the back. Let me see the inside. You said the backside is a figure-8, then?
So these are figure-8s, yeah. So these diaphragms are figure-8s.
Wow. So the back is open on the inside, then.
Yeah, but then you got the grill and.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the what they represent is something like up left, down right, up right, down left, or some some figure-8 configuration, and then you actually sum all of these together to get the W channel.
Okay, makes sense.
So it's possible that summing process would introduce more bass.
I was thinking maybe because they put the LFE on a specific channel that it didn't get mixed in with the others.
Well, it's possible. It's also possible that it's really hard to say. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what mic they used. I don't know what. One thing that wasn't clear to me when I checked out, because I looked at their little demo thing, you can download 2 for free or whatever.
Yeah.
What wasn't clear was which B format. So there's actually multiple standards of B. There's WXYZ. There's also WYZX. And
because we don't want to be confusing.
That's right. We don't want to confuse anyone. And it's just a matter of WXYZ is like a more sensible channel arrangement for sound designers like us, but WYZX is actually a more sensible arrangement for the programmers who create decoding software.
Well, this is where I was going to lead. I was going to ask this question. So now I've got this ambisonic library, and I'm going to use one of these sounds, and I want to put it into a game, and I've got to go through Wise. Is Wise prepared for this?
You'll have to ask Wise. I don't work for Wise.
Because I was wondering, I'm thinking...
I'm pretty sure they have Ambisonics. So this is the thing that I wasn't sure about, is which one, right? So the first one is called Fuma, and the second one's called Ambix, or Ambix. Okay. So that was unclear to me. Like, for example, when you import an Ambisonics file into Unreal,
yeah,
you have to specify in the way we parse it is you specify in the file name, is it Fuma or Ambix?
Okay.
So you just type in Fuma or Ambix.
And the same thing exists for all 5.1. Like, there's all these different options of whether you want LCR or LRC. Right.
Well, yeah. So so part of the new thing is that in 4.19 is you can also just import a multi-channel file. So you can just import a 5.1 file. If you import a 6-channel file, it'll assume it's 5.1.
Okay.
Which is cool. That's for whatever reason wasn't in it before.
But if you've exported, if you've encoded it in a specific way, you may find your flyover, instead of going left to right, is going from left to the back of the room.
Yeah, exactly. So it's important to know that, and that was not actually clear to me when I looked at the library. So I wasn't sure if you saw something that specifically said XYZ or WXYZ, or if you just looked that up.
No, it's just in the software itself, the sound field software. When you go into Format B, it lines things from left to right, W, X, Y, Z.
I see. So that's Fuma. So that's good to know. But it would have been nice to know, like, more up front.
Yeah.
And if you were using software that wasn't theirs, because like a lot of people have now released software that decodes.
Yeah.
So that would have been good information as well, to just know, hey, because a lot of those will be like, well, pick your format. Is it Fuma or Ambix?
Yep, I agree. I wasn't sure about what kind of trouble I was in downstream from using this.
Yeah,
But that's not to take away from the quality of the library. It's fantastic. Thank you, Pro Sound Effects, for letting us check this stuff out. You've definitely got a fan in me, and hopefully we've talked some other people into checking out your Submerged and New York City Ambisonics, which sounded great. Well, guys, I guess the last thing to say is that GDC is next week. And I know Mike and I are going to be there. We're going to carpool up together. Our annual trip, if Kyle does it annually.
This will be our second annual trip.
I started going like every 2 years, although I like going every year because it's so good to see everybody. But just schedules like Dan's suffering through make it tough. Jeff McMillan says he's going to be there. Let's see, who else? Anybody in the chat room said they're going to be there? I hope to see everybody, man. If you see us there, please come up to us. There's a talk coming up. I can introduce a talk that Vince and I and Jeff and Kristen, but I don't have the email in front of me. Oh, shoot. Where's that thing? Hold on. Let me just not talk out of my butt. Let me just find out what this talk is.
While you find that, I'll pitch my thing. So
okay.
I won't be there, but Aaron and Ethan will be there showing off on the show floor. So you can, if you come down to the Epic Games, the Unreal Engine booth, you can find Aaron and Ethan. We've got, I hope, some really cool things that people are going to dig. Nothing like over the top like we did last year, but some cool stuff. I think really cool stuff. So stuff I think worth looking forward to.
Very cool. Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Our talk is going to be called Thinking Outside of the Box, Working with Other Musicians to Realize Your Game's Soundtrack. It's going to be Vince, Jeff Ball, Kristen Nigas, and me. And I have no idea why they invited me, but I'm going to be there. Anyway, not to be self-effacing, it should be a really, really interesting talk. It's at the Career Theater North Hall, Friday the 23rd at 1:30 to 2:30. So please make it down if you can. and we'd love to see everybody. And I hope everybody gets a chance to go to GDC and isn't working so hard that they don't get to take this time off to kind of recharge their batteries. Every time I go to GDC, I feel so inspired by the game industry again. Like over a year, you start to kind of lose a little bit of that luster, through the hard work that we do. And I find it so important to go to GDC and just recharge, and it's so exciting. So Dan, I'm sorry you won't be there, but we're going to check out what you got. All right, fellas. So we made it through a technically challenged show. I think we got everything covered. Thank you again to Pro Sound Effects. Thank you, Isotope, for sponsoring the show as always. I better get off of here before my computer shuts down and just kicks me off. It's good to see you guys, and we won't have a show next week, right? I mean, we have talked about having a live show if we can figure it out. I contacted the hotel where I'm staying to see if they had a room. The price to rent that room was so high. I was like, wow, that's a little too much money for us. Maybe we'll just do some guerrilla filming from a Denny's or something.
Or the Good Hotel.
Yeah, the Good. We might just break in, just take over there downstairs and say, yeah, we're totally staying in a room. So if we can put on a live show, we will. I highly recommend people go check out if you're hungry for game audio stuff, and game audio people who are going to GDC already know about this. But go to Sight Glass Coffee in the mornings because there's some amazing game audio stuff happening there. Yeah, I guess we'll just see you there, and we'll announce if we're able to do a live show.
Where will we announce it?
Well, we'll be announcing it on Twitter, and then it'll feed
usual
through to
channels,
Facebooks and all those things. What'd you say, Dan?
All the usual channels.
You're same bat channel, same bat time.
Just trying to give you a segue to our social media outro.
Oh, dang it. See, I'm too stupid for this job. Hey, you can follow us on you can follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook and thumb us up on YouTube's and look for Game Audio Hour everywhere. Again, the people who watch the show of Irby's every time they're probably going, Kyle, we know. There might be one new person a year, but hey, that new person now knows where to find us. Thanks everybody. Thanks chatties. And I'm getting off of here. This show's been crazy. Bye.